Today we're going to talk about Trump's CNN town hall, how it ended up backfiring, and how the media should be covering him. And I interview the congressman for New York's 10th Congressional District and lead impeachment counsel for Trump's first impeachment, Dan Goldman, about his thoughts on that town hall, whether he believes the DOJ probes into Trump are taking too long, his response to the George Santos arrest, and his message to voters on the GOP's obsession with a now debunked Hunter Biden investigation. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. So there's something that's been bothering me about this CNN town hall with Trump, aside from the obvious of platforming a guy who CNN hosts themselves admitted that they couldn't fact check. But I've been thinking about this a lot, and what's been bothering me is this sense of continued betrayal from our institutions that we've been conditioned to believe actually work. Like, whether naively or not, I've always viewed an outlet like CNN as having the best interests in mind in terms of journalism. But what's become clear to me, again, probably very naively, is that with this town hall, CNN has dropped the pretense that what it is doing is for the benefit of journalism first and foremost. Like, there's not a person on this planet who cannot see what that town hall was. It was a money grab, a ratings grab. And that was bad enough on its own because it basically lifted the veil on the fact that they are operating very clearly as a for-profit entity. Like, they'll shroud themselves in a cloak of journalistic integrity, blah, blah, blah. But they are a business. They're operating as a business. And when their desire to make money is in conflict with their journalistic principles, they're going to err on the side of money. And I'm sure that there are people watching this saying, yeah, dude, brilliant observation. A business is going to act as a business. And again, I get it. You know, maybe that's how CNN always operated and I just couldn't see it. That's certainly possible. But I guess that it's the discretion that they'd previously aired that fooled me, but in any case, they're certainly not very interested in discretion anymore. And so that was bad enough unto itself, the recognition that this titan of journalism will discard those principles the moment that they need to. But what was immediately worse was this effort by some folks at CNN to then pretend that this was somehow justifiable or necessary. Like, CNN hosted a Trump rally. They filled the audience with Trump supporters. They faced him with a moderator who was not capable of holding him to account. And yet, here's what CNN's CEO Chris Licht had to say. He said, quote, "You do not have to like the former president's answers, but you can't say that we didn't get them. Caitlin pressed him again and again and made a lot of news, and that is our job. While we may all have been uncomfortable hearing people clapping, that was also an important part of the story because those folks represent a large swath of America. America was very well served by what we did last night." And beyond that, here's a snippet of what Anderson Cooper had to say along those same lines.
Now, many of you think CNN shouldn't have given him any platform to speak, and I understand the anger about that, giving him the audience, the time, I get that. But this is what I also get. The man you were so disturbed to see and hear from last night, that man is the front runner for the Republican nomination for president. And according to polling, no other Republican is even close. That man you were so upset to hear from last night, he may be president of the United States in less than 2 years. And that audience that upset you, that's a sampling of about half the country. They are your family members, your neighbors, and they are voting. And many said they're voting for him. Now, maybe you haven't been paying attention to him since he left office. Maybe you've been enjoying not hearing from him, thinking it can't happen again. Some investigation is going to stop him. Well, it hasn't so far. So if last night showed anything, it showed it can happen again. It is happening again. He hasn't changed, and he is running hard. You have every right to be outraged today and angry and never watch this network again. But do you think staying in your silo and only listening to people you agree with is going to make that person go away?
Talk about tortured responses. All to parade CNN around this if they put on a symposium on thermonuclear physics. It was a Trump rally. They made a Trump rally. This wasn't some historic news event. It was a bunch of Trump supporters who fucking applauded when Trump attacked a woman who 1 day earlier he was found liable of having sexually abused. A bunch of Trump supporters who applauded when Trump mocked CNN's own moderator. So CNN can dress this pig up in all the lipstick in the world, but it is still a pig. And the worst part is that everyone knows it, and yet still CNN is pretending. The only thing worse than this naked ratings grab is them playing make-believe and pretending that it wasn't what we all know it was. And here's the worst part for CNN. Yes, they got 3.3 million viewers. Yes, that is like 6 times what they normally get. But according to Brian Stelter, who's a former CNN reporter, quote, "The network returned to its usual ratings levels on Thursday, the day after, averaging 538,000 viewers in prime time. No retention from the night before." In other words, they netted no long-term benefits, no new viewers, no swath of disaffected right-wing Fox watchers, just a torched reputation for some fleeting one-night event that didn't even exceed viewership for the last town hall that Joe Biden did. I cannot imagine a planet on which this thing was worth it. The fact is that there is a way to cover Trump, and first and foremost, it's to make sure you're doing it in a way that you're able to push back on his lies. And there are people who can do that in real time. Jonathan Swan did it in his Axios interview. I understand it's not easy, and look, if someone isn't able to fact check him in real time, that's fine, but the solution here is simple. Do not put yourself in a situation where you're going to allow yourself to get steamrolled by the guy. That's all. If you know that he's going to use whatever platform you give him to spread disinformation and spew hateful rhetoric and make people unsafe and incite violence, then don't do it. We already know what the natural conclusion of platforming his lies are. The guy incited an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. People died that day. We don't have to sit around here and pretend that he is some disciple of God and that when he speaks, we have no choice but to listen. He's just a run-of-the-mill, white-collar criminal who's conned his supporters into believing his lies. That's all. And we don't have to willfully participate in his schemes because of some misguided allegiance to norms. This is not a typical situation, and we cannot respond to it with typical solutions. And I don't say that being biased in favor of the left. I say that being biased in favor of democracy. This should be beyond partisan politics. Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy and the future of this country. And if you're treating him the same way that you treated, like, Barack Obama, then you are part of the problem. And CNN and other news networks who seek to normalize this guy are absolutely part of that problem. So if ever there was a pitch for independent media or progressive media, this is it. Because after what we've been through as a country, if news outlets are still guided by both sidesism, then they are missing the plot. So I appreciate you watching, and if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. And hopefully the defections in that audience that CNN is seeing right now sends a pretty clear message that we are not going to be a party to these attacks on our democracy just because certain outlets want to profit from it. Here's a preview of my interview with Congressman Daniel Goldman. Do you feel that the DOJ probe into both the classified documents and the insurrection on January 6th are taking too long, or judging by what little public information we have, is this an appropriate amount of time? Because, you know, like you said, for the rest of us on the outside, there's really no insight into how long this should take. But you take the George Santos indictment, for example, and at one point in his rambling screed, he did say, how is it possible that I can be indicted so quickly? And that was the only part that I agreed with, because it does seem like in an instance where you do have this low-level, albeit very clownish congressman in George Santos, and when there is a problem, there was an indictment. There were those 13 charges that were passed down relatively quickly. And I only say relatively because the only schema we have for this stuff is that apparently it takes years and years and years for any prosecution to be completed. So again, I guess going back to that question is, do you think that this is an appropriate amount of time, or do you feel like it is taking too long?
Well, I think it took a little too long to begin the investigation into Donald Trump and his associates for overturning the election. But that was for good reason, which was that the Department of Justice was focused on the violent insurrectionists who invaded the Capitol on January 6th. And they wanted to dismantle people who were dangers to the public safety and dangerous to the public through violence, such as the Three Percenters, Oath Keepers, et cetera, Proud Boys. So there is that element of it, which I think delayed the start of that intensive investigation. But it's very important to remember that a criminal case does not brought after you have one witness come in and give you incriminating evidence. And then you say, oh, all right, we got it. Let's go charge tomorrow. And I think a lot of people, after watching the January 6th hearings, felt very much like that should happen. But as powerful and excellent as those hearings were, they were small snippets of much longer depositions and testimony without any cross-examination, without any consideration of the rules of evidence that apply in a court of law, and without any legal standard that they needed in order to prove a case, such as beyond a reasonable doubt, as you would have in a criminal case. So when you are actually investigating a criminal case, you need to understand the full universe of witnesses and what they would say. And every time you interview a witness, they often give you another lead and something else to track down. Plus, we know that a lot of the close associates of Donald Trump and Donald Trump himself are putting up legal blocks to testimony from others that have to be litigated through the courts. So it is important, I think, for all of your viewers and listeners to understand that criminal investigations generally do take a long time, and especially the conspiracy to overturn the election, where there are so many different prongs of that effort and so many different witnesses. On the contrary, what I was struck by the George Santos indictment is how simple it was, and how simple and flagrant and brazen his schemes were. This was an incredibly unsophisticated crime where essentially you get the documents, you get the bank documents, you get the other records by subpoena, and you can pretty much put together a strong case based on those documents alone. Perhaps there wasn't a couple of inside witnesses that were able to provide some context to those documents. But they didn't even address, I think, many of the more significant issues that have been called into question about George Santos, including the $700,000 that he gave to his own campaign. So what I view the Santos indictment to be is an expedited indictment based on the easiest charges to prove. And there may be more investigation to come after that, but because he's a sitting congressman, they wanted to move quickly.
To check out the full interview with Daniel Goldman, click the thumbnail right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also find a link to the audio version of this podcast on this screen, so feel free to subscribe, a link to my Spanish channel so that we can reach Spanish speakers, and of course, a link to this channel to see more of my content like this.